Get started. Thank you. Welcome, everybody, to Octopus Energy Germany. Really delighted to have you all here today for the first of what will hopefully be many similar sessions. Today and tomorrow we're going to be talking about flexibility. Really exciting topic and very relevant here in Germany, but actually everywhere around the world right now. Very quickly, I'm Andrew Mack. I moved to Germany, you might know this from the accent, I'm not a native, to start a little energy business. And with now being part of Octopus for best part of 4 years, really starting to make a big dent in the German energy market. We can see there's a lot more to come. I'm really excited about particularly smart metering and getting that finally rolled out here in Germany. First up is going to be Greg Jackson and Chris Peeters. Chris is the transformative CEO of Elia. Elia is a transmission system operator active in Belgium and Germany. Germany is under the 50 hertz name that I think you'll all be familiar with. Chris' journey starts with McKinsey. He's worked at Schlumberger. And now Elia has had a huge impact on putting consumer assets at the heart of our flexible future. So really excited to have him here today. Greg Jackson needs probably very little introduction. Our founder of Octopus, group CEO, and a very high energy person. So really looking forward to the discussion the two of them are going to have and kicking off the next 24 hours. Thank you.
I can probably talk. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take this off. So, Chris and Greg, a huge welcome to you both. Either of you need much of an introduction. Your CEOs of multi-billion-dollar businesses. Each of you are industry disruptors. You're ripping up rules and creating huge amounts of value. But despite being at opposite ends of the energy system, you've come together, you've joined forces at COP26. How did that happen? And what happened next? So, over to Chris.
Oh.
Okay.
So what happened was there was a podcast of Greg that I listened to, and where I said, like, finally somebody that understands what I'm trying to do. So and then at this moment of time already, my wife, I asked her, like, reach out to this guy, make sure that I can have a meeting with him, and so she did. And then we had a first discussion, which was, let's say, even more confirming that this was the guy I needed to spend time with. So, and then we decided that let's try to see with a first MOU that we on a number of dimensions can see what we can learn from each other. So that's something that we concluded then in COP26. And then we had real people doing real work, which is not us. So then it's on 3 different work streams. Went really well. We saw as well that we had a good matching between the teams, that they were all excited about that, and so that got the ball rolling, and still continuing to work on that mode today. And Don't know if he follows me, but I still following on a regular basis what he does, especially when he's interacting with clients directly on Twitter, which is always fun to read. So, yeah.
And so, Greg, from your point of view, what on earth is a supplier like Octopus doing working with Elia? Where are the projects and what are you doing?
Well, the first thing is that Octopus isn't an energy supplier. I mean, we supply energy to a lot of people. I mean, 5.5 million households in the UK and 130,000 here in Germany and 500,000 across the world outside, I guess. And but the reality is something we both got in common was an observation that at times of change, industries get reinvented. And the reinvention of energy is going to be possibly the greatest reinvention of our generation, because an entire global $2 trillion sector has to change to reduce the impact of humans on climate. And increasingly, we see that governments around the world are driving that change. The companies that are ready, the organizations that have got answers that will help deliver the goals that humanity needs are set to create a better world and hopefully to drive prosperity for the societies and for their stakeholders. There's a couple of very quick things, by the way, Chris. So I didn't realize it was your wife that made the intro. You and I essentially had a first date on Zoom. And I don't know, I mean, I'm old enough now that I can't really remember my first date, but I've been in restaurants seeing people on first dates. And they seem to sit there going, yeah, me too. That's what I think. That's what we were like. And hilariously, Google has closed the circle. If you do a Google search for Greg Jackson wife, you'll find a photo of Chris. And so technology brought us together, and technology creates a bond that can't be separated.
And you talked about governments driving change. I think the war on Ukraine has also driven a significant amount of change since COP20, since COP26. This incredible disrupting force. And the change that's rippling through the energy system, it's not over yet. But have we done enough to end this crisis? And what should be the learnings and next steps that we take out of it? And this time we'll get Greg, your first thoughts, and then pass over to Chris.
Okay, so I mean, a few quick thoughts. I mean, the first is, the war in Ukraine is utterly terrible, and you feel bad even thinking about the good things that will come of that crisis. And the first thought is with the brave people defending their country against aggression. But I think and not long ago I was doing a speech in Frankfurt, and the speaker before me was the CEO of Entech, the Ukrainian, one of the Ukrainian grid companies. And forgive me for language, but fucking hell. I mean, he got on the stage with a piece of metal that was shrapnel from a Russian missile that had been in one of their transformers 2 days earlier, and they'd already repaired it. In a world where so often we're held back by bureaucracy, by people trying to do things the old way, no one is seeing what agility looks like the people running the Ukrainian energy system. One of the interesting things he talked about was that the most resilient parts of our system are often the distributed parts, that the centralized command and control of systems creates big vulnerabilities and makes it hard to deal with this incredible array of challenges they have. But where they have batteries, where they have cars with electric batteries and vehicle to grid, where they have batteries in people's homes and distributed generation, they're the places that are actually able to keep functioning under any circumstances. And it reminded me a little bit about, during periods of technology change, what you find is that the solutions that are right for the problem you see also solve an incredible number of other problems. For example, the iPhone was a better phone, but no one would have forecast that when there was a pandemic, the fact it had a camera that could scan a QR code would help us stop being mobile again. But that's because fundamentally the technology was better than the stuff it replaced, not just for that one job, but for so many other things. And in the same way, I think with clean energy, with distributed energy, we find that it creates resilience and energy security. And that's driving tremendous interest from governments around the world now in recognizing that distributed, renewable-based system is the most secure energy system they can have. More resilient. It's like the internet. Its resilience comes through its distribution. But it solves other problems too. You know, obviously we know that across the world, 10 million people are killed per year by local air pollution. Renewables essentially eliminates almost all of that, whether it be car exhaust or the emissions from boilers. So what I see is that the war in Ukraine has highlighted so many things, both directly and indirectly, that are causing governments to recognize that the things we're sitting on today, flexibility, distribution, are the solutions to not only tackling climate change, local air pollution, but also driving down energy costs and ceasing our vulnerability to the powers that have forced energy prices up. So I'm optimistic, but I think it's also a bit like when you go on a diet. Now, obviously, I've never been on one, as you can tell, but my understanding of when people go on a diet is after a period of time, they look in the mirror, they go, fantastic, it's all sorted, and then they start eating pies again, or schnitzels here. The big challenge we have now is making sure that the good intentions are followed through with continuous action and improvement. I think it's incredible that still, you know, take the UK, we've got a 13-year queue to build new renewables on the system. And similar pictures apply in other countries. Throughout the world, planning, permitting, and grid connections are huge barriers. And yet we saw in Germany that 5 liquid natural gas terminals were built in a single year, after being mired in bureaucracy for a long time. But once the crisis hit, people catalyzed action. Now, if we think the energy crisis was bad, we know the climate crisis is far, far worse. And we need people to act with the same urgency now with electrification at every scale.
Thanks very much. And Chris, from your point of view, as the group that is keeping the energy system alive in the face of shortages of gas and renewable energy coming on, have we done enough to end the crisis?
Maybe first, before going there, what I would like to add to the story of Entech, which is a very inspiring story. And I saw Timchenko, the CEO, as well, a couple of weeks ago. And what he told was, although this is a terrible situation, it's also an opportunity to build a clean energy system in Ukraine. And when are you going to do that? He said, we're doing that. I just connected a onshore wind farm of 135 or something megawatts. So in the middle of the war, they're still continuing to build and connect onshore wind farms to the system. So that was quite amazing that he's building already the future while the war is still in its full extent happening. He says, like, I see already opportunities where I will start to build a clean energy system going forward. That was very inspiring to see that, actually. That being said, what we have seen is a couple of, at least, I would say, inspiring elements in the last, let's say, 18 months. Yeah, that was, on the one hand, it made obvious to our politicians that they had to speed up. So that's something that we sense at this point of time everywhere. We did last year a study with a lot of industrials, and a lot of those industrials basically said, if I had been further in my own electrification path, if I had been further in having PPAs with green contracts and moving into that space, I would be in a much better place than I am today. So my contracts of green energy that I bought 3 years ago with some premium because it was my ESG obligation, now they're the cheapest part of my portfolio. I'm a little bit, let's say, disappointed I didn't buy more at that point of time. And on top of that, these are robust, relatively, let's say, of course you have a lot of, let's say, volatility over the day, but in the long run at very stable prices. They're not so dependent like fossil fuels on the geopolitical situation because they're produced locally, and so you can actually create a much more resilient system by doing that. And that's something that we now see that politicians start to understand. Here in Germany, a couple of industries had to stop their production during the crisis, during the gas crisis, because of the fact that they were not able to compete anymore on the market. And everybody had a wake-up call, like, if we want to keep industries here, we need to further accelerate. So we don't do the energy transition only for what you just said, which is a world which is cleaner, where we don't have people killed by pollution and all these things, but also to create a world where we have a resilient welfare creation by the industries that we can keep here. And when they have to do their investment plans, you see that if they can do it with a view on access to renewables, it's much more easy actually to commit to something. So with the whole discussion around the IRA, and then people say like, oh, the IRA, people will go to the US. And if you talk to industrials, they basically say, of course, it's attractive to go to the US, but if I would have access to clean energy here, I would actually have my investment over here because I actually can justify them to my board and I can actually have an FID going there. So that's a good news. But so it shows that we work too slow. It shows that we need to go faster. And so the question is this moving now? And so we had the great honor to receive this Monday in Ostende for the offshore wind, North Sea offshore wind, 9 head of states and the president of the European Commission to show like how we're going to do that. Very exciting moment for us because we're doing a lot in offshore as well. But the interesting thing is that we had from several of those, have had many meetings where each time we increased targets. Now it's about how to make it happen. And there was even a concrete question of Ursula von der Leyen that said, like, tell us what the Commission needs to do so that you can do your job. So that's interesting because if you look back 3-4 years ago, we were the disruptors, the annoying guys that were coming all the time with IDs and nobody was interested. And now you see that a whole bunch of stakeholders, it's again me, so a whole bunch of stakeholders that actually have completely changed their mind on how important it is what we do. And then you get a very different level of traction, of course.
That's fascinating. And the two themes of sort of both urgency and the rate of change. We are seeing this increasing speed in terms of transformation. And I think that's coming clearly through both of the responses you've given. So here is a question for Chris, which, you know, as we electrify heating and transport, domestic flexibility for us is becoming incredibly important. However, it seems, in a sense, non-intuitive that a TSO is involved in this directly because consumers, the end consumer, are so very far away from you. Why is a TSO encouraging consumer flexibility?
If you look at the system at macro level, you don't need to be a big visionary to see that this becomes very, very important for us to get access to it. So what we do in that transformation of the system is we basically close fossil fuel plants, coal plants, gas plants, which have a lot of flexibility, because our system was, unfortunately have people of my company in the room, and so actually what we did was quite easy before. So what we did was we managed a system where we basically moved up a gas-fired power plant a little bit based on the demand, and so we followed demand by somebody putting on the buttons in a control center, and that was it, and we had whatever, a handful of those big installations that helped us to manage the system and keep the balance into that system. Now, if you move those systems out and you only have renewables in that, the challenge becomes, of course, how are you going to balance your system? Because renewables, well, they have this intermittency. They are there when there is wind, they are there when there is sun, but they're not there at the other moments. So you need to find a way to balance that. And for us, the right way to do that, if you want to do that at optimal cost and at optimal value creation for society, is that you go to look for flexibility at the demand side. Now, the good news there is what you just said. EVs are coming in, heat pumps are coming in, and they bring with them an enormous amount of flexibility. And that's probably the challenge that both of our companies have had at the first part. We had the ideas and the vision to make that happen. Yeah, we're still in the build-up phase of that flexibility, but I think to be an early one into that and being able to integrate that micro-flexibility is very important to us. And I remember when I did, 5 years ago or something, the first EV study, I had my board, let's say, protesting against it. And I said, what are you doing? You're a grid company. Don't touch. It's for the TSOs and for the suppliers. You don't have to do that. I said, have you imagined for yourself what will happen when we have a couple of million of cars that come home around the same hour in the evening, they plug their car and it starts to charge because there is no intelligence behind that. Do you know what that means for the system? Do you think I can keep on the lights? And I said, okay. you can do something around that. And so we started doing these things where we basically said, like, we need to be ready for something that will come, and something that in Elia's vision will come in an S-curve, which means that at the moment that you figure out that it's coming, it's too late if you were not ready. And therefore, we're investing quite heavily in understanding that microflexibility and integrating that. And that's why this partnership for us is so important. We have no intention, as you said, like, we're relatively far away of the client. We don't understand clients well enough to give them, let's say, a specific client-facing offer. But having then the aggregate of that and understanding what that means in terms of flexibility for system management is key for us to be an efficient operator and to make sure that we can integrate ever more renewables without having to create a lot of, let's say, dedicated flexibility, because we're going to look for that flexibility in the market where it is, and EVs and heat pumps are an example of massive amounts of flexibility that you can use to balance out your system.
So it's clear that we need flexibility, but historically, consumers have been treated as very passive off-takers of energy in the system. And historically, there's also been a great deal of skepticism that consumers will respond to price or will participate. They've got better things to do, like living their lives. Changing their habits and potentially giving up control of their electrical devices might not be welcomed by anyone. So, Greg, how do you motivate customers to change their behaviour and participate?
You know, I think every industry thinks it's different. Whoever you speak to in any industry, oh no, ours is different, it's mission critical, people behave. It's not true. Basically, we've got so much to learn. We've probably got more in common with the world of supermarkets and retail as a sector than we realise by a mile. And so, because energy is often grown up thinking it's different, it rejected what has been learned in so many other sectors. Even this idea of flexibility is hilarious. I don't know whether in the tomato sector or the baked bean sector or the kind of, I don't know, the pork sector, they talk about flexibility, right? I don't think they do. I don't think there's a pig farmer who's like, look, I can make this many pigs, but I need a bit of flexibility. It doesn't work like that. What you really have is consumers buy something. Consumers buy stuff. And when they're buying stuff, they're making a decision based upon what's convenient, what's cheap, what's easy, what's going to meet their needs, what's going to be fun. I mean, whatever. And if you understand consumers, you can get them to buy stuff in different ways. In the world of supermarkets, we have offers. You know, you'll get 10% off an extra 100 millilitres, 3 for 2, 2 for 1, buy one, get one free. Special offer when it's gone, it's gone. The Aldi middle. I mean, there are more ways of packaging a product into an offer than you can possibly imagine. And what we're finding in energy is if we package the product of energy up in different ways, people buy it in different ways. So already, I think, in Octopus, we have electric vehicles that charge at specific times. They have times where you can choose your own slot and you get a different price depending on the length and the time of the slot. Ones where we just automate it. Ones where we'll combine it with solar panels and a battery and everything else to minimize your total cost. Ones where we give you a flat price, ones where we give you the most dynamic prices. They all change behavior. It's easier to change behavior today than it's ever been. I think partly because we've got forms of consumption that use huge amounts of energy and are very discretionary, like when you charge an electric car battery or when you heat a home with a heat pump. And we have more access to the technology that lets us ambiently learn people's preferences and behaviors, or if we choose to alert them to things, to get them to do so. A couple of days ago, I was speaking to a super VIP in the UK who said they'd been in an Uber. And the Uber driver was checking his smartphone to find out when the next cheap Octopus energy session was, so he could make sure that he maximized his financial benefit from using energy in the right way. That was when that VIP said to me, I get it, energy has changed. And I think part of this for me is, first of all, then thinking, look, let's not try and reinvent the wheel. Let's look at every other sector. How do airlines fill empty seats? How do train companies work out how to maximize the utilization of the rail, and so on? And I think the second thing is, let's imagine a world that had never had fossil fuels, because really the challenge we've got is incumbent thinking, driven by the world we inherited. Fossil fuels have a characteristic, which is typically you can turn a power station on, particularly gas, you get a rectangle power and you turn it off. If you have that characteristic, then you build a system that works in a particular way. But renewables have a different characteristic. That is that when it's windy and sunny, and maybe with other forms of energy, other things apply, you have the cheapest energy you've ever had, super low marginal cost. And so if we'd never had fossil fuels, we would almost certainly, humans are very ingenious, we would almost certainly have built a fantastic advanced society, but one where the behaviors were built around the fundamentals of the energy system, but the renewable energy system. And if we'd built that society, we wouldn't have all the problems we talked about just now. So our job is often to think about what that world would look like and build that world and recognize that so much of what we already know today and what we have today is actually holding us back. It's a disadvantage. And by the way, I should say very quick, I mean, in the same way that mobile phones, the smartphone enabled a lot of developing countries to leapfrog landlines and move to a kind of just a better system without all of that incumbency. So I think the things we're talking about today, I mentioned earlier that renewables fix so many problems. They'll also help us democratize energy into low-income countries. And a lot of them will start with a system that looks like the one we need to build today. And I think when I first met Chris and fell in love and ended up being Google husband and wife, Chris was talking this stuff at a time when no one else was. And you did sound crazy. Not you, we, together, to people that were listening to that first date. But today I think it's increasingly clear that what we're describing is the world we need to move to. If we need to move to that world, we also need to move to that mindset that energy only exists because of the consumers, the customers, and the businesses that use it, and that we can better meet their needs in a renewable world through this bizarre thing called flexibility, or what I might call consumerization.
So I'd like to point out that Greg is not an engineer, that he's an economist. And I think both Chris and I are engineers. So I've got a question for Chris, which is, Greg's painted this wonderful world of markets and prices. But can we build a grid system solely around market forces? Won't grid operators need direct control of the consumer's devices? And I ask that because here in Germany, there are Section 14A of the Energy Act is looking at enabling direct control of consumers' devices. And so there is this tension between beautiful packaging for consumers versus a stable system.
I think back in 2017, they had this, what they thought, and even what some people in my team thought was a brilliant idea, which was we allow TSOs to cut off charging of cars for a period of 2 hours. And so some of my people came there and said, like, it's great, we should support that because that gives them more control, just what you said, we need to support. And I lobbied vehemently against that. I said, like, it's the most stupid idea I ever heard in our sector. Yeah, and it's not, I heard a lot of stupid ideas, but this is one of the best ones in terms of stupidity. Because what you basically get is what you don't want to get. I had another one stupid, and I will tell you in a moment, yeah, which was that we could have intervention force as Elia for our offshore activity. So I could have armed guys in boats, etc. So like, as well, no thank you. So, but here, if you think about that somebody in a control center is able to cut off the charging without knowing what that person is having at that moment of time. He might have had a long trip by his car and it might be empty just that day without us knowing, and we say like, oh, we need some capacity, so let's switch them off. And a little bit later he has some issue in his family and he cannot drive his car to the hospital. That would be a disastrous situation. So we are of the opinion that you need to give as much as control as possible in the hands of the customer. We, of course, need to have, in the balancing of the system in those last 15 minutes, we need to have some tools to control. But for those tools, we pay and we make sure that somebody's offering them to them. We buy them on the market. We pay the market price. That's the way how we think that things need to happen. And I come back to Greg in the thinking that we need to have. One of the eye-openers for me was at some point of time, I had a producer that came to me and he was explaining me a brilliant idea they had, and it was, yeah, we combine some hydropower with some batteries and then we can mimic the ramp up of a gas-fired power plant. And I'm like, why would you use two superior technologies to mimic something which is inferior? I mean, I don't understand. And the answer was fairly clear. It's because your ancillaries are mapped to the ramp-ups of of gas-fired power plants. And so I said, like, oh, this is where our thinking goes wrong. Yeah, very soon we will have a market full of VPPs which are structured the way gas-fired power plants behave, and we have no gas-fired power plant in the system anymore. So our model is completely flawed in the way how we think about that. And the same actually is happening in what you see in consumption. What you see with my grandmother, they basically had consumption which was only in the moment. Yeah, your toaster, you don't say, prices are high, I eat my toast later. It's not going to happen that much. We get more and more appliances where you say a lot of, let's say, possibilities to increase my comfort or to reduce my price are there. And so that will also drive the change in how clients or customers will look at the market and look at their own situation and see how they can optimize that into their benefit. And so the more we can do that, in the market, the less we can do that by ancillaries, the better it is. So we're fully, let's say, into a market environment where the system balances itself to the maximum extent already, and we're just there to make sure that the small differences in the end are controlled and are checked by our control centers. That's something that you need. That's, let's say, you're an engineer, you know that's what you need. But the more actually that people do by giving them the right signals and the right incentives, the less we have to do. And as we are lazy, we like that.
So, I mean, this has been fascinating, and I think for me one of the really interesting thoughts is that we are being held back by our familiarity with a fossil fuel-based system. So, sort of building on that, if you had to sort of say what the three biggest obstacles to having a smart grid across Europe, what do we need to do to enable this transition? What three things do we need to do?
Price signals is one. It's also, price signals is two.
Yeah.
I was thinking price signals might be three, right? Because ultimately what we need is the ability for retailers of energy to drive changes in the way people use energy that best reflect the underlying physics of what Chris just rightly described as being superior technologies. That really requires price signals which retailers can bundle up in any number of ways. But frankly, if we have a big enough price signals, we see change. Like this year, we saw the price signal that gas became very expensive and gas consumption dropped dramatically. Industrial usage of gas in Germany fell by a huge double-digit percentage, whilst output barely fell at all. We discovered the price signal worked. In the UK, UK ran out of electric blankets last year because it turns out an electric blanket uses 40 watts to keep a human warm, whereas a gas boiler uses about 10,000 watts. And the price signal of gas caused people to use it. By the way, the people snuggled up in an electric blanket watching TV, not worrying about their energy bills, were the happiest people. So in every way, price signals are what we need. And when Chris was talking about this bonkers fucking idea that some central bureaucrat can turn off the charging of your electric car, what is the best way to make sure we never get to net zero? The best way of making sure we never get to net zero is to cripple the very solutions. So I think you're absolutely right. That was the stupidest thing ever, and people tried it in the UK as well. Now, what we found, by the way, if you give people price signals, you can shift the consumption of the electric car around in ways that are hugely beneficial to the system. The average commute is about 15 kilometers. The average battery capacity might be 300, 320. We can go for days on end without charging the battery as long as we're meeting the consumer needs, and then be ready to soak up the wind and the sun when they're available. It's all built around the consumer, and I think the kind of thinking that Chris just described really is fundamental to this issue. The system is not there for the people who run it and for their convenience. It's not there for our convenience. It's there for the consumers and businesses that rely upon the most important product in society, which is energy. And our job is to meet their needs whilst delivering a system that doesn't destroy the climate and doesn't kill people through local pollution and provide security. And all of that will come with the price signals that encourage us to invest in the right places, to use the product in the right ways, and to ultimately to create entire new industries that didn't even exist before because it's superior technology.
Thank you, Greg. And Chris, is it all down to price signals?
Well, for sure it's the most important thing, and I probably from in my early days at Elia, I've been hitting my teams that I wanted to have a real-time price signal available for everybody in the market. Now, the good news is after many years of shouting and whatever, threatening people that I would fire them, or I never did that, but now we're finally going to have it by the end of the year for the people linked to our grid, and by the end of next year we will have it actually available for everybody. And that's important, as Greg just said, because if you can get that signal there, you can have people reacting. They don't need to go through ancillaries. They can actually manage their own way in the markets where they want to manage that. That's for me a fundamental thing. Then the second thing that you need to have is simplicity. We still have those hugely complex systems with things that I really have to scratch my head myself, like how does this work? How many barriers do we create with the system of balancing responsible parties and all this kind of stuff? Like, if you're not in this sector, you don't even understand what they do, what it is, how it works. And so it creates huge entry barriers actually for innovation. Yeah, because innovation is driven by, I test something, it works, or I learn from it, as we have seen with the SpaceX rocket. Yeah, that's an example of learning by doing. Yeah, it exploded after 4 minutes. It was a big success because we learned so much. Yeah, so that is what we should have in the market, and we don't see it enough in the energy market. That's what I like about Octopus. It does these trials all the time, and that's important that we continue to test, learn, do these kind of things. So that as well a very, very important thing, that we create a simple system with very low entry barriers. As I always use as a reference, I've done a lot of, let's say, commodity markets in my McKinsey period. And there I said, like, you need to have a market that is that simple that a day trader can participate in that market. Not that day traders are a good idea. Typically, they go bankrupt very, very fast. But when day traders can operate on a market, it shows that entry barriers are low, and then sophisticated players will develop services that are good for the consumer, because they don't have to go through all kind of complexities to make it happen, like I have to repackage it into an ancillary service, this kind of thing, which moves you away from your focus on the customer. So you want to focus on the customer, says, what does he need? He needs to have his energy managed in a way that is convenient for him at a price that is acceptable to him. That is what we need to try to do. And then we optimize it somewhere behind. And the more we can optimize in the market, the less a TSO needs to do. As I said before, we don't like to do too much. So the more we can do it by a price signal, the more we will like it. And so that's why we introduce it as a, let's say, high voltage first, and then to the full market by the end of next year.
And Marcio, I should say that I'm slightly joking when I say price, but I just want to be really clear when I give it all three priorities. But actually, to another degree, it's kind of true. Why does oil and gas attract so much investment? Why is it possible to break the rules for gas terminals but not new renewables? It's because, frankly, if I speak to the CEOs of large oil and gas companies in private, they will say, look, at the end of the day, we make more money in molecules than we do in electrons. And so we put our money into molecules. And if we really want to drive the transition, that's a price signal. So everywhere we look, the reality is, if we think about the underlying economics that will force or drive companies, incentivize companies to build the renewables we need, to lobby for the system changes, to create the simplicity we need, to get consumers to become IMBYs, not NIMBYs. By the way, for example, in the UK, Octopus, and now in Germany and in Italy, we're building something called a fan club. If you've got renewable generation near you, it's cheap electricity when it's windy. That's a price signal. And so in the most academic sense, as an economist rather than an engineer, that price signal could drive a clean transition far faster than asking people to appeal to their consciences or to wait for 10-year consultation periods. If we do everything on price, things will move.
Fantastic. So Chris and Greg, thank you very much for that very broad-ranging discussion. So I'm going to both very much for framing, I think, the themes for the rest of the workshop going forward, which are around urgency, around system change, around thinking and envisaging the world differently, and ultimately about getting stuff done on the ground this year, because next year's too late. So thank you very much.